And now, here to introduce today's reviewer is Sandy Ridlington, who is Secretary of the Library Foundation Board and a two-time random reviewer here.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Some months ago, I was listening to the Moth Radio Hour when I heard a storyteller begin his story like this, quote, "We're at the park. It's my wife and I's second wedding anniversary." Unquote. Well, first I went into shock, and secondly I thought, I have got to call Jo Alexander, today's reviewer. Now, I knew she would share my hilarity at this grammatical outrage, but I also knew she would bring something new to the conversation about my wife and I's second wedding anniversary. I mean, in the first place, she would probably praise the speaker for his visionary use of the possessive. In the second place, she might, in fact she would, I'm sure, put it into some kind of political context that I didn't understand. But whatever she said, I knew I wouldn't be disappointed. Jo Alexander was born and raised in London. I mean, not in London, but in England. And her first job as a publisher was with a press that produced magazines for foreigners who were trying to learn English. From there, she moved to the University of London Press, where am I doing this right? Yeah. The University of London Press, where she did English as a second language publications. In 1974, Jo moved to the United States, just in time, she said, to hear Nixon resign on TV. After a stint with the Forest Research Lab at OSU, she was hired as managing editor of OSU Press. And if any of you has ever worked on a small press, you know in those days you did everything. So Jo acquired the books, then she wrote the rejection letters, she edited and laid out the books she acquired, she wrote press releases, managed the production of these books. So that meant she dealt with all kinds of printers in town and elsewhere. She went to meetings where she acquired more books and tried to sell the ones she'd acquired. It's really exhausting living like that. Eventually the press hired some more staff and Jo got to do what she really loves to do, which is edit and lay out the books. Jo likes to say, she says this repeatedly, she says, "I do not know the rules of grammar. I just edit by intuition." I mean, as long as I've known her, she said it this way. But judging from the praise she's received from writers, designers, printers, even other editors, I guess her intuition is probably brilliant. She's been called the heart and soul of OSU Press, an editor of rare gifts and grace, intellectually scrupulous and faithful in her attention to her author's work, but also pragmatic and creative in her approach. That's the intuition. A person who cared about graceful writing and who understood that this passion presents a host of dilemmas. But it was the novelist Brian Doyle who gave Jo the highest accolade I think a writer can ever give an editor. He said of her simply, "Jo Alexander was ever in service to the reader through the writer." Now, I think that makes her the ideal person to cast a shrewd eye over a woman who claims to claims to give us the confessions of a comma queen. So let's welcome Jo Alexander.
Is the mic about right? I'm afraid I'm going to be reading what I want to say because I haven't done this before. I'm a subscriber to the New Yorker, and I was delighted to read Mary Norris's article in the February 23 issue this year called Holy Writ. You've heard of people who are thrilled to see someone like themselves in a movie or on TV. Well, this was like that for me. I was reading about the experience of an editor, someone like me. Except the person I read about in Holy Writ, and then in Between You and Me, the book I'm reviewing, is not really like me. Start with how she got her job at the New Yorker. A friend of her brother was married to the chairman of the board of the magazine. I suspect that is how quite a lot of people in publishing get their jobs, but not me. My husband and I moved to Corvallis, and I got a job at the OSU Forest Research Lab, making sure that the bibliographies at the end of articles by the forestry faculty were consistently styled for the journal in which they were to be published. Boring! Except for the other people who worked there, who were great. Hoping for something more challenging, I applied for 2 campus jobs, one with OSU Extension, the other at OSU Press. Disappointingly, I did not get either. Then I got a call from the person who had interviewed me at Extension. The person who had got the job had decided against it. And was I still interested? You bet. I gave my notice at the research lab. Then I got another phone call, this time from the director of the OSU Press. The person he had hired had quit after 3 days. He and the woman at Extension had talked and agreed that I could have whichever job I wanted. That was the beginning of my 30 years as managing editor at OSU Press. Once we both had our jobs, they were apparently very different too. I'm guessing that many of the people here saw the last Daily Show with Jon Stewart. He showed all the people who worked on the show. There were so many of them. The camera roamed through one office after another, one smiling person after another smiling person. I think Norris's job at the New Yorker is rather like that. She tells us that when she became a collator, she, quotes, transferred changes from the editor, the writer, the proofreaders, usually 2, and the fact checker onto a clean proof for the printer. And to avoid making embarrassing mistakes, quotes, I learned to check my work 3 times, a page at a time, line by line as I was doing it, then again, line by line after I'd finished the page, and finally, mechanically, one more time, by looking not at the text, but at the changes. Who has that sort of time? I saw a film, I don't recall the name, in which an editor, maybe it was Bennett Cerf, went by train more than once to pay a house call on an author to discuss edits and changes. Those were the days. I guess there was money in book publishing in those days. There certainly is not in university press publishing these days, at least at a small press. When I started at the press, I was the only employee, as Sandy told you. When I left, I was one of 3, plus the director of the library and press. There was no time to be a perfectionist, and I am not one. I did make embarrassing errors. One of my best was on the title page of the Guide to Trails in the Corvallis area, called, not surprisingly, Corvallis Trails. There were 3 L's in Corvallis. We made the correction in subsequent printings, of course. One of my favorite authors dubbed that first edition the Welsh edition. But if you are not a perfectionist, you are going to let embarrassing errors slip past you. And obviously I tried my best to keep them to a minimum. But what are you doing as an editor? What is the point of an editor? Let's back up a bit. There are several kinds of editor. A developmental editor works with an author from the first draft to the final text. She or he might propose moving chunks of the text from one place to another, rewording a concept, deleting or adding material, and so on. I think I was a developmental editor, and a pretty pushy one at that. Once I started editing on computer rather than with paper on pencil, I simply made the changes that I thought appropriate rather than suggesting it. I tracked the changes and told the author to reject any changes he or she did not approve. This tracked manuscript would go to the author with a separate list of questions and comments. Norris appears to be writing as a copy editor, whose role is to make sure the spelling, punctuation, and grammar are correct and follow the house style. Though she tells us that she is now a page okayer, a position that exists only at the New Yorker, she tells us. A copy editor, if she or he is doing a thorough job, will also probably ask questions. What was your intention here? Did you intend to use the word amazingly several times in the same sentence? Are you sure this quote is correct? And many book publishers also probably have the manuscript copy edited after the developmental editor and author have produced a final draft. But I was the copy editor too. The New Yorker, we are told by Norris, has a style book, which she describes as, quotes, a venerable legal-size 3-ring binder, its pages encased in plastic sleeves. We at the press followed the Chicago Manual of Style, and journalists tend to follow the AP style book. The fact that there is more than one style to follow begs the question. Is there a right way and a wrong way? Are editors wasting their time? I confess I had never considered this until I was thinking about Norris's book and this review. I know that the books on which I worked are better for my editing, and I assume that Mary Norris feels the same way about the articles she edited. But how and why are they better? The copy editor does a valuable job. Regardless of the style they follow, they make sure that there are no glaring errors and that the style is followed consistently. To my mind, the New Yorker's style is a bit odd sometimes. I always notice the comma between the month and the year, July, 2015, and wonder about it. They, to quote Norris, separate introductory clauses with a comma when the meaning is restrictive. Norris herself finds this a bit much and quotes an example criticized by Ben Yagoda in the New York Times. Quotes, before Atwater died, of brain cancer, in 1991, Norris explains that the New Yorker seems to think that otherwise a reader would think that the poor man died multiple times of multiple causes. Yagoda comments, that is nutty, of course. But to my mind, it is another type of editing that is really valuable. That is, helping an author to be the best author he or she can be. I found online a glorious article dating from around 1937 by one Walcott Gibbs, titled Theory and Practice of Editing New Yorker Articles. It begins, the average contributor to this magazine is semi-literate. That is, he is ornate to no purpose, full of senseless and elegant variations, and can be relied on to use 3 sentences where a word would do. Among his 31 tips for editors is, try to preserve an author's style, if he is an author and has style. Norris, as a copy editor, thinks that she should not ultra-crepidate, which basically means criticizing beyond one's area of expertise, but find a good balance between doing too much and doing too little. I sometimes did fear that I was doing too much and braced myself for an angry email from the author. This rarely came. Most authors appeared to be grateful for my work. I was a new set of eyes, hoping to clarify and tighten, ask questions. Interestingly, the more experienced the author, the more he or she appreciated my editing. First-time authors were generally prouder of each word. Norris agrees, quotes, "In my experience, the really great writers enjoy the editorial process. They weigh queries and they accept or reject them for good reasons. They are not defensive." To be fair, virtually all the manuscripts I edited were non-fiction. I treated the one original work of fiction that I edited with a much gentler hand. This was Brian Doyle's Mink River. If you have read it, you'll know that hands-off was a wise approach. Much of Norris's book, to be honest, puzzled me. Is it a memoir? A grammar guide? A history of spelling? An inside look at the glamorous world of the New Yorker? I don't know who is the intended reader. And one of the first questions that a book publisher should ask is, who is the intended audience? Another editor? A New Yorker reader? I'm both of these, and I have to say it did not really work for me, though I have heard others not a million miles from this library say how much they enjoyed it. The introduction provides an interesting outline of how Norris came to work at the magazine. Chapter 1 is about spelling. Do we still need to know how to spell now that we have spell check? Yes, we do. Which dictionaries does the New Yorker use? A history of spelling guides and dictionaries. Spelling errors Norris has caught. I only found some of this a little interesting. Chapter 2 is about some issues that copy editors wrestle with, like whether to use which or that. She spends 5 pages on that topic, using words like restrictive clause and modified element. My eyes glazed. Then she tells more stories about her work and the people she worked with, followed by a section on the dreaded dangling participle, which she is apparently willing to permit rather than rewrite. I guess if you are editing well-known and perhaps full of themselves authors, that would be okay. I always rewrote them. Dangling participles are one of my bugbears. I think it is because I always want clarity. I don't want the reader to have to stop and wonder about the meaning. Chapter 3 is about gender. And curiously, much of it is about gender in other languages. Not something that an American editor really has to worry about. It feels like padding to me. I did get interested in the latter part of the chapter, a discussion of gender and pronouns. Like Norris, I have had to wrestle with a transgender relative. Calling him by a new name was simple, but the pronouns slipped out wrong for months. What pronoun to use for a single person when you don't know the gender of that person is also tough. As feminists, neither Norris nor I is willing to adopt the old approach of using he to include women. She lists some interesting gender-neutral neologisms, but none of them have caught on. I don't object to their, nor to s/he, though Norris does. In the end, I must agree with her that one of the best solutions is the frequent use of the feminine, as in, anyone can see for herself. But an editor should not make an author do this, so we need another plan. Norris does not seem to have one. In chapter 4, we get into grammar, and my eyes glaze over again. I doubt that this is Norris's fault. She is doing her best with some big words and rules. Who is used when the pronoun is the subject or a predicative nominative? This may work for some people, but not for me. Norris quotes The Simpsons' Mr. Burns, saying, "You were he." She says this is correct. I take her word for it, but I wouldn't have known. And I still don't quite understand. Here comes my confession. I spent 30 years as managing editor for OSU Press without knowing these rules. So I'm sure I made some errors as a result. Things just sound right or they sound wrong to me. I've been thinking about that, and I wonder whether this is a privilege of being born into a relatively well-spoken family, though English was my mother's second language, and of having a decent education in Britain. Next, we move on to the comma. Norris calls herself the comma queen. She gives us some great examples of sentences which don't mean what we, presumably, want them to mean if we omit the serial comma. That's the comma before the word and in a list of 3 or more. My favorite is, this book is dedicated to my parents, comma, Ayn Rand and God. Commas are, Norris points out, for 2 purposes. One is to register a pause, the other to clarify the meaning. To my mind, the 2 blend together. We pause because to do so clarifies the meaning. The New Yorker uses commas for meaning only. Norris claims that you are not supposed to pause at each comma in a sentence like this. When I was in high school, comma, at Horace Mann, comma, in the Bronx, comma, in the 1970s, she says, I really don't see how any of the commas could be done without. I find that pedantic and intrusive. She goes on to consider commas that, according to correct grammar usage, shouldn't be there. One example is the following. Eve was across the room in a thin, comma, burgundy dress that showed the faint outline of her stomach. Norris thinks this is superfluous, and the author either lecherous or misguided or both. I disagree. He may be lecherous, enjoying the faint outline of her stomach, but the comma gives subtle emphasis to the fact that the dress is thin. I think, to quote Walcott Gibbs, we should respect an author's style if he is an author and has style. In chapter 6, we move on to hyphens. This, it seems to me, apart from some of the amusing examples, is a chapter that only copy editors, and probably not all of them, could love. Do general readers, even attentive readers with an interest in language, care whether lifestyle is 2 words, 1 word, or hyphenated? The only reason I can see to care about hyphenation is to clarify the sense of the text. Norris gives us a great example of where a hyphen is essential for this purpose. Quotes, I like the hyphen in high-school principal because there actually is such a word as school principal. And if the school principal is high, she should be escorted off the school premises and given a TV series. It is in the same way that I care about not hyphening an adverb ending in ly, as in beautifully dressed. No clarification needed. Chapter 7 provides us with a discussion of more punctuation. Exclamation points, dashes, both M and N. Does everyone know about M dashes and N dashes? If anyone doesn't, the M dash is the longer, approximately the width of a capital M, and you can now guess, an N dash is the width of a capital N. The M dash is the more useful and should be used without a space on either side. Though in Britain, where I started my editing career, we generally did include the spaces. The N dash is much the same size as a hyphen, and no one will much notice if you interchange them. Norris writes, there is no mark of punctuation so upper crust as the semicolon. She adds, in my observation, the semicolon is used best by the British. I will take the compliment. I really like the subtlety of the semicolon used well. Norris quotes Henry James. She was bad, semicolon, but she couldn't help it. Perfect. And of course, there are many more pedestrian uses where the pause is too slight for a period, but a comma would not be appropriate. Quotes, there is mounting evidence of global warming, semicolon. Of course, some people will never believe it. In chapter 8, which deals with the apostrophe, I learned at last why there is no apostrophe in Mary's River. Apparently in 1906, Teddy Roosevelt instructed the US Board on Geographic Names to standardize place names. The board decided that, quotes, the need to imply possession or association no longer exists. The Wall Street Journal termed this an apostrophe eradication policy. There are 5 exceptions to the rule, and one of them is in Oregon. At the request of the Oregon Geographic Names Board and the Oregon chapter of the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation, the apostrophe was restored to Clark's Mountain in 2002. The board said the approval was given, quotes, to correspond with the personal preferences of Lewis and Clark, which I find just a little odd, coming almost 200 years after its naming by Captain Lewis, and 100 years after the apostrophe was presumably eradicated. Then there is what Lynn Truss, author of Eats, Shoots and Leaves, called the grocer's apostrophe, which is probably a bit unkind to grocers. One sees the apostrophe wrongly used by many more than grocers. This is the apostrophe used in error in a plural, bananas, taxis only, or in the wrong place for customers' use only. Norris is forgiving. Why should a grocer have to master apostrophes anyway? I am less so. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard for me. Chapter 9 is a bit problematic for a reviewer who does not know everyone in her audience. It is about cursing. I visited the dentist recently because there was some decay beneath an existing crown. The dentist had to take off the old crown and drill out the decay before taking on an impression and putting on a temporary crown. To distract myself while this was going on, I put in earbuds and listened to one of my favorite podcasts. It was very funny. I chuckled, I laughed, my stomach convulsed in my effort not to spit out the dental equipment. Inevitably, the dentist asked me what I had been listening to, so I told him. But I suggested, it is explicit, since that is the word that iTunes uses when there is no censorship of the language used. I went back a week later to have the permanent crown put on. As the dentist walked in, he said, he does have a potty mouth, doesn't he? Well, so does Mary Norris, and so do I. And so now does the New Yorker. There is a long piece online by John McPhee about his experiences with 3 New Yorker editors, William Shawn, Robert Gottlieb, and Roger Strauss. The first part of the article is about this very topic. Neither Shawn nor Gottlieb permitted McPhee or Alice Munro or Calvin Trillin to quote his subjects verbatim. McPhee gets his own back in his online article. To quote Norris, by using fuck as a noun, verb, adjective, and interjection 14 times in a single paragraph. Norris herself has an online article titled Dropping the F-Bomb on the same topic, some of which also appears in the book. I particularly liked the story of Pauline Kael, the New Yorker film critic, who never tired of trying to get the word shit past Sean and never succeeded. She was on leave in the late summer of 1979 when Apocalypse Now came out, and Sean allowed the critic who was sitting in for her to quote the opening lines of the film. Saigon, shit. Like Mary Norris, I dislike euphemisms. Everyone knows what the F word is. We know what the asterisks stand for. She writes, quote, "It no longer occurs to me to query the use of four-letter words, even when they are used gratuitously, as in, I missed the fucking bus. I used to be a prude," this is all still her, "but now I am a ruined woman." We had a discussion in the copy department a few weeks ago about how to style the euphemism. I don't like any of them. Fuck euphemisms. Euphemisms. Get on the goddamn fucking bus. The last chapter, frankly, puzzles me. It is all about pencils. When did a copy editor last use a pencil? Norris tells us how much she likes number 1 pencils and how hard it is to find them because everybody else likes number 2 pencils. She tells amusing stories, but frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. The epilogue is in honor of one of Norris's co-workers at the New Yorker, Lou Burke, who died in 2010, leaving more than $1 million to her local public library. Either the New Yorker pays much better than the OSU Press, or Burke had a private source of funds. Norris and other colleagues spoke at the celebration of the bequest. Clearly, everyone who worked with Lou had been very fond of her, although she may have been critical of their grammar from time to time. And I realized that contrary to what I had thought at the start of the book, Mary Norris in many ways really is like me. She's someone who loves words, has spent her career working with words with other wonderful people who love words. It's a privilege. Thank you. Yes.
I can hardly wait for my copy to come, and I'm going to read chapter 2 very carefully.
Which was
The one on which or
which and that.
Which and that. Always a puzzle. But here's my question. I am very, very concerned about a word that seems to be falling out of the vocabulary. It is three variations: take, taken, and took. Nobody says that anymore. They all say bring. People are constantly bringing things. You don't bring your books to the library, you take your books to the library. I don't get it. What do you think?
Did everyone hear the question? The question was, why is everybody saying, for instance, we bring our books to the library, when what they mean is we take our books to the library? And I have no idea.
It's all over. It's in print, it's on television, it's in dramas. It's really bugging me.
Okay.
On the issue of which and that, for me, Strunk and White very briefly tells you what's what. And it's simple and it took right away, so to speak.
The gentleman said that Strunk and White explains which and that very clearly. To me, I always say, can I put a comma in here? And if so, it's which. And if I can't, it's that. Does Strunk and White do anything more than that? Different from that? Yes. What do they tell us?
Restrictive versus non-restrictive.
Okay. Yes.
I'm just going to say there's a can of worms with the bring versus take. I mean, there's many, many words like imply and infer. People use them interchangeably sometimes. I do think they have subtle distinctions, and I won't propose my own, theory about bring and take. But I think if you think about it, sometimes you can figure out for yourself what the difference is. I don't know.
Should I repeat that for people? The woman said that there are more words that are similar, like bring and take, that people like infer and imply, and that we should be careful about which one we use because they have slightly different meanings. Yes.
I have the impression that in the last, say, 25 years, there are many more typos in magazines and books.
Newspapers.
How come and why, and is that accurate?
I don't know if it's more.
Question?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are more typos in books and magazines and newspapers than there used to be. Growing up in Britain, I read the Guardian newspaper, and we all called it the Groniad because it was so full of typos. And that was a long time ago. But I think if it is happening more, it's probably because of our not being Mary Norris with 3 proofreaders and a copy editor. I think things are happening very fast these days, and there's less money to pay for checkers.
Too much belief that the spell check does it.
Yes. Too much belief that the spell check does it for you. Yes.
I enjoyed your presentation a lot.
I'm sorry?
I enjoyed your presentation a lot. Now, why does a lot have to be 2 words?
I have an issue with a while being 1 word. So, I don't know. A lot. Well, I can't explain it. I'm sorry. Yes.
I have a tribute to a very effective copy editor for the for OSU Press. My book, Joe was kind enough to copy edit. Just as an example, my first thought for a topic was ever-blooming wildflowers of the Pacific Northwest, the art of Bonnie Hall. Joe's suggestion was ever-blooming, the art of Bonnie Hall. Correction, I would call it, not a edit.
Thank you, Jim. Did everyone hear that? Okay. Thank you for speaking up so I didn't have to remember what that first title was. Yes, at the back.
If you feel like language is an ever-evolving thing, how much slack do you think should be cut for that? My husband and I argue about it all the time.
There is a part in Norris that I did not speak about where she quotes, and I need to be careful here, but she quotes a friend of hers who is talking what to me is like hip-hop language and is clearly not correct. And I can't, maybe in 50 years' time, that'll be the way everyone is talking. But I don't know. I think clearly the people who make the dictionaries for us understand that new words come in and become accepted and used.
Well, maybe
My-
an example.
Yes.
Creating a verb out of a noun.
It's going to happen, isn't it? It's going to happen, and you can have a personal abhorrence of it, but if it happens often enough, it will become accepted, I think. Yes?
You only touched on editing Brian Doyle's novel. It seemed like when that came out, it was a big deal that it was the first novel OSU Press had ever published. We heard him down here at the Troubadour talk about it. And was he all over the map? Anyway, how did you approach that differently than you did at the editing of the many nonfiction books that you did?
When editing Brian Doyle's Mink River, the first fiction we'd published at the press, how did I approach it differently? I understood that as a fiction writer, Brian had a style, and that it was not my job to mess with that style. Whereas a non-fiction writer, I think they may have a style, but their first duty is to be clear. And if they aren't, and I can help them to be, I will do that. With Brian, I mean, it was not grammatical. There were commas all over the place, and not whole sentences and so on. But that was clearly his intention, and I wasn't going to argue with him.
Well, of course, he's an editor too.
Yeah, he is.
He
Yes.
knew what he was doing, didn't he?
Yes, he did. There were a few times when I had to correct him factually. And the one I remember is he was talking about the flower of a foxglove with a drop of water sitting in it. No! And there were a couple of others like that. But I let him go on the way he wrote. Are we?
I'm just wondering what challenges you had growing up in England, speaking English, coming to America, English. Were you, neighbor, honor? What challenges did you have, and how did you self-correct?
Spelling was reasonably easy. But I think, Sandy said that I had told her over and over that I didn't know grammar. And that was my biggest challenge, because it's taught differently in Britain, or at least it was when I was growing up many years ago. We called the things we were doing with the language with different words, and so I was almost forced to get into the intuitive mode. The vocabulary and spelling I just found fascinatingly different, and I kept finding new words that I hadn't known were different. I mean, I still do. I can't remember any examples, but the language is a really, really different thing. You all know what Winston Churchill said, right? Two countries separated by a common language. Am I done? No.